still say your prayers? Number ones?
You might have seen all the promotions for the new film Longlegs. From creepy trailers to the random phone number on billboards, it was gaining a lot of attention, and people have been waiting to watch this film for a while. I did not see any of this. Instead, I went to go watch it because it was $5 Tuesday, and my boyfriend said that a lot of people were talking about it. I want to go through this film again and take you through my thought process because there's a lot. So, here's my walkthrough and breakdown of Longlegs. Spoilers ahead. So we start off the movie with some lyrics from the band T-Rex. It goes, "While you're slim and you're weak, you've got the teeth of the Hydra upon you. You're dirty, sweet, and you're my girl." And this is a song from Get It On, Bang a Gong from 1971. Now this is hardly any importance to the film, but it was something the director Osgood Perkins felt fit. Perkins even presented the idea to Nicolas Cage, who played the role of Longlegs, and Cage agreed. He said that he recently had been listening to T-Rex because his kids were playing the guitar. So I found this interesting because Perkins explains how this is basically his writing process. He basically does it off of vibes. Well, he specifically says, "You're along for the ride." And I really do believe in the idea that the story knows what it is. You're there to curate it and make sure it doesn't go into a ditch. So this explains why the movie is the way that it is. This came from the idea that Longlegs used to be a glam rock singer, and also explains his horrifying face that we're scared with only 0.3 seconds into the film. Let's start talking about the story. We first see someone driving into a snowy area. They then stop, and it zooms in on this white house in the middle of the snowy land. Inside the house is a little girl sitting by the window in her room, and she notices the car parked outside her house. She decides to get dressed and greet the creepy car all by herself, which isn't the best choice, but there might actually be a reason for her feeling compelled to do this. Maybe she's just a kid in the 70s with no concept of stranger danger, but anyways, she walks outside to the car and sees no one there. She then hears a cuckoo in the distance, and she walks around her house, and bam, we're greeted with Longlegs out of nowhere. He tells her, "There she is, the almost birthday girl. Oh, but it seems I brought my Longlegs today." And he proceeds to bend down to her level, where we can now see his distorted face. I nearly spilled all of my chocolate raisins, bruh. Speaking of movie snacks, I wanted to do something a little fun because I just reached 100 subscribers, and I totally was not expecting that. Thank you. If you want to just get back to the review, skip ahead. So, I'm taking y'all along to try Ryan Trahan's Joyrides. Why this candy? My boyfriend and I recently discovered his fun YouTube videos, and I've been a fan of his wife, Haley, since high school. No, this is not sponsored. This was a spur-of-the-moment idea at 3 a.m. when we were watching his videos and heard they'd be released in Target. So, the next day we checked one Target and didn't find them there, so we searched at another one and we were officially on a hunt. We found them, and here's our review. They're meant to be a better option to your usual candy with reduced sugar. We got the strawberry ropes and they smelled like donuts, so that was appealing. They were actually very tasty despite the reduced sugar. The only thing is that they're a little sticky in your mouth, but that's alright. Obviously, they're still candy, so they're not the best for you, but it's a great option if you're looking to cut back on sugar because we love getting a sweet treat every other day. Overall, we really liked them, and we're probably going to try their different flavors in the future. Great movie snack. Again, thank you for all the positivity because I have no idea what I'm doing. Anyways, let's get back to the review. So this is the first time we see Longlegs' face, but it's so quick and unwarranted that it kind of leaves your brain to fill in the gaps and make it a whole lot scarier. So I talked about all this because I want to discuss his face, and it's basically supposed to look like he's had all these plastic surgeries that botched his face. His hair is also white, and this is to show his former glam rocker life. But it comes off as uncanny valley, which is maybe what they're also going for. But man, some people out there are gonna end up looking like long legs with all these fillers. So anyways, this whole scene is presented to us in a square, which is kind of what the film Saltburn did for the whole movie. But Longlegs does it in this opening scene to represent how vague everything is at the moment. There's only so much we know of this man and his intentions, so our view is quite literally limited. Okay, so now we see a red screen displaying the title of the movie and the actors, which is great. It's chilling and it makes me feel like I'm watching a movie in the 70s. We even get little jump scares between the names, and one looks like a bloody nun, which dang, we can't get a break, but I really liked that. After this, we see part 1, his letters. We're now in the 90s, and we see our main character, Lee Harker, an FBI agent, in a room of colleagues getting an assignment to go door to door asking about a man. Her boss tells them to go alert and always assume he's around. She's assigned to work with a male partner, and we're now in the car pulling into the neighborhood. He suggests she hang back and he go knock on the door, and she's already very wary of being there, and her partner goes to knock on the door. So she gets out of the car and begins examining a house she feels drawn to. She tells her partner, "It's that one. He's in there," confidently after just looking at it. She suggests that they call it in because she feels the dangerous person they're looking for is in there, and her partner says no, they're not going off on a hunch since it's their first day doing this. So he decides to go take a look and tells her to relax. They walk up to the door and he knocks and states he's FBI. Lee follows behind him and we're watching her look around. The person then answers the door and her partner is shot in the face. Well, yeah, that could have been expected, but now Lee has to go in alone to find the shooter, and she's breathing super heavily, which stresses me out because they're gonna hear you, girl. But apparently, this is done on purpose to add a sense of reality. She's a young and rising FBI agent. It's probably one of her first times doing something like this. She should be dead quiet, but can't help but catch her breath after she witnessed her partner get shot in the face like nothing. She knows she could be next. It's very real. But eventually, she goes upstairs and finds the man sitting on the bed with his hands up. She tells him not to move, and he responds saying, "I won't." So we cut to Agent Harker, sitting in a dark room with a projector. She's being tested with a series of images, and she has to state the first thing that comes to mind. They also give her a range of numbers and tell her to guess the correct number. She answers in this order: camera, table, lights, tiger, door, mother, father, piano, 33, and 0. And her answers are important for later. So this is a psychic test they performed on her, and she passed it 8 times, but also failed it 8 times. Her boss, Agent Carter, says, "Half psychic is better than not psychic at all." They take her to further investigate this crime, and he explains to her that a family of 4 lived in the house they are parked in front of. Their name was the Horns, and 3 of them were killed, and 1 of them committed suicide. A letter was left, but it was written in a code in handwriting that is not connected to the family. He says that they have already gathered 10 letters from the past 30 years that were also found in a home where the whole family was murdered. All the letters contain one name: Longlegs. The father of these families is the one who kills everyone and then themselves. They believe there is something or someone making them do it. So Agent Carter shows her the evidence they have collected about these mysterious murders, and it's in this scene where we get our first of many Bill Clinton photos. He was president at the time, so it makes sense, but I mean, They might as well have listed him in the cast for all his screen time. Anyways, she begins to explain that she gets this weird feeling about the investigation, like something tapping me on the shoulder, telling me where to look. Agent Carter asks how she was able to identify the house that killed Agent Fisk, her male partner, and she says that she gets this intuition from time to time. Agent Harker goes on to ask what these families have in common. Why were they chosen? And all of them have daughters, with birthdays on the 14th. So, why the 14th? I'll get into that later. But the families were never killed on the 14th. Only the Horns were killed on that date. So in the next scene, Lee is on the floor trying to make sense of all the evidence while we hear a recorded 911 call from one of the victims. It sounds like the father is calling, and he's telling the operator that his daughter is not his daughter, and he's trying to keep quiet. We're also now seeing evidence from when these killings happened, one being a newspaper titled "Father Kills Family and Self." We also see images of the crime scene and a birth certificate of the daughter. The father goes on to the operator, saying that it's the best thing to do it in her sleep, when her eyes are closed. And we now see Agent Harker standing in front of all the evidence on the wall, making it look like an eye. We're being flashed images of all the evidence and sounds of people screaming on the telephone when they called 911. It's gory and disturbing and creates a suspenseful tone. Agent Carter then walks in to check on Agent Harker, and she's asleep next to all the evidence. He urges her to come take a break and get a drink so they can talk about the evidence together. So now they're at a bar, and she begins explaining to him that there's no sign of anyone breaking in or even being there, just the family. They only know it's Longlegs because of the letters he leaves, but they don't know how they got there. She suggests that maybe he's telling them to do these things to each other, and Agent Carter responds by saying it sounds like Charles Manson. This gives Lee the idea that Longlegs must have an accomplice since Manson had his family. So, they decide it's getting late, so she drives home. Carter says she gets to meet his wife and kid, to which Leah responds, "Do I have to? This girl wants to go home." But this is just her character. She's quiet and just straight to the point. So they go to meet his family anyway, and we're introduced to his wife Vanna and his daughter Miss Ruby. Ruby invites Lee to go see her room, and oh my gosh, this girl wants to go home. I love her. But now we're in Ruby's room, and they're sitting in silence until Lee picks up one of her trophies and asks what happened to it, referring to its missing head. Ruby says its head got cut off, and she doesn't know where it is. Lee responds by saying that's more her job, and then she corrects herself that she meant finding things. So they carry on their conversation, and Ruby is talking about how her dad doesn't want her to grow up, but she's going to anyway. She says that even veals grow a little, and they live in a box with their legs tied up and everything. Which, wow, why is this sweet little girl saying this? But it could be a reference to Silence of the Lambs. It could also be that these veals grow no matter what. The only way to stop them is to kill them. So, it's very important for later why Ruby says this. Ruby then goes on to ask Lee if she wanted to be an FBI agent when she was younger, to which she replies, "No, I wanted to be an actress." Ruby then says that messes up kids. Okay, she's watching TV too late at night. But this is interesting because Lee saying she wanted to be an actress as a little girl is innocent and sweet. But Ruby points out how it's not so sweet after all. Is there any sweetness in growing up? Ruby asks another question. Is it scary being a lady FBI agent? To which Lee responds saying, "Yeah, it is." Vanna walks into the room saying it's past midnight and Agent Harker probably has work to do. But before she leaves, Ruby asks her last question of the night. Can she come to my birthday party? To which Lee replies, I'll be there. Lee is now driving home in the dark, smoking and listening to Water by Melody Carrillo, featuring Elizabeth White, which is a great vibe for her. Apparently, they use that song because Perkins' wife wrote the song, which is pretty awesome. So Lee arrives at her house and hears loud rock music in the distance. But she walks inside anyways, and she lives in this very nice log cabin that is very neat and clean. We then see her sitting at her desk with wet hair and eating cereal. I think it's cereal. And she's calling her mom, Ruth, to check in. She asks why her mom took so long to answer the phone and what she's doing. Keep in mind, it's past midnight, so how did she know that her mom would be awake? I know not to call my mom past 10 p.m. But anyways, Ruth says she's just going through stuff, and Lee begins explaining that she can't sleep because of work stuff. And it's here where we get this crazy shot of a doorway being behind her, and we get this feeling like something's gonna run up or pop up, but nothing happens. You scare yourself. Ruth says that she can confide in her about anything. After all, she was a nurse for 8 years and saw a lot of nasty stuff. Ruth then says, "It's somebody's birthday coming up." Uh-oh. But before we get into this, Leah hears someone knocking at her door. So she walks up to her door and shakily says, "Hello?" Like, who could it be at your door at this hour, Miss Girl? But after her very friendly greeting, she deadbolts the door and turns on her light outside. It's here where she's able to see a dark shadow in the distance, and we get a crazy transition of her running away and just teleporting outside with her gun. And again, she's breathing heavily. She looks back to her house and sees someone in the window. So she rushes back inside looking for them, but they have already left. And they left a letter. It reads, "Do not open before January 14th. Now we see a screen that says Part 2, all your stuff. We now see Lee opening the letter with gloves. It's a birthday card for someone who's turning 9, and it contains a message from Longlegs using his code. Lee rubs off some of the ink, which means it's pretty fresh and must have been written recently. She begins to decipher it using a Bible and translates it to say, "Tell them how you got this, how it came into your head. I'll cut off her hanging milk tits and bleed your mommy dead." And all while she's writing this horrifying message, we're hearing a voicemail from her mom asking if she's okay since she never called back. She then receives a phone call, but this time it's about work. There's been another murder, and she goes to investigate this crime scene after pulling an all-nighter. She walks into the home where she meets Agent Carter, and he's explaining that they found this murder late, since the family was expected to be going on vacation and no one checked on them. He hands her a letter from Longlegs, and Lee is able to quickly decipher it. Agent Carter gives her a shocked look and asks how she was able to do it so fast. She says, "I looked long enough, sir," which is a reference back to when she fell asleep next to the evidence. But anyways, she translates it to say, "Down low, too slow." So they go upstairs to the master bedroom where the murdered parents are in bed. They uncover the sheets to reveal them covered in maggots and bugs because they've been decaying for quite a bit. And they discover that the daughter is around 9 or 10. So, Lee is disturbed after seeing and hearing all this, so she calls her mom for some comfort. And every time she calls Ruth, she picks up the phone by saying, "Lee?" And Miss Girl gives sass back by saying, "Yes, still your only daughter." But I guess it's to show that she's the only family she has. So Lee is talking to her about how work is keeping her busy, and she may not be able to swing by after all. She says that they put her on something important, and her mom asks if she'll be able to come over next week to celebrate her birthday. Uh-oh. But Lee says she might be busy, and so her mom brings up this question in response. "Lee, are you still saying your prayers? Our prayers protect us from the devil." Which facts, but that comes out of nowhere. Lee ends the call and goes to do more research on the case. We now see more death certificates and newspaper articles But this time, one of them is talking about a satanic cult in Oregon. Lee is taking note of all the dates when each murder occurs. She then pulls out a book called 9 Circles of Hell. So I'm guessing Ruth really spooked her out. She turns the page to a satanic symbol with a triangle. Eventually, she's able to figure out that the date of the murders line up to form this satanic symbol. She discovers it's an algorithm for Longlegs, and each date of the murders happens either 6 days or 6 days after the 14th. She shows this to Agent Carter and explains that the camera family is one of the victims as well because it follows the algorithm. However, a priest was visiting the family the day of the murder, and he was killed as well. The daughter of the family, Carrie Anne, was at school and was not present for the killings. She's alive and kept at the psychiatric hospital. They also notice that the 13th is missing to complete the algorithm. So, they figure that Longlegs is going to strike again soon. They head to the Cammer family farm to investigate, and as soon as they get there, Lee immediately knows where to go. So Longlegs has this thing where X's mark the spot for his murders, and they approach a barn that has X's on the doors like a typical barn door. And they walk into the abandoned barn and eventually find a cross nailed into the floor. They decide this is pretty odd and start prying the floorboards up. Underneath is a box and a note with the same triangle symbol from Longlegs. They open the box to reveal a creepy, disheveled doll laying inside. Carter sits it up and it opens its eyes, which, yeah, this type of doll does that, but it represents something else. So, they have the doll investigated and opened up like an autopsy. They discover it was made by a skilled craftsman and has human hair. It also has a silver ball in its head. The clinical doctor says he's been calling it the brain because it was inside her head. He also says it's hollow, but holds a tool next to it, and it begins making a noise. We see Lee captivated by this, and images of red snakes appear before we get a very spooky scene. We're now seeing the doll when it was new, standing in front of a dressing mirror, and slowly, Longlegs starts bending down in front of its face to greet it. But before we can see his face, it cuts, still giving us that unsure and uneasy feeling of what he looks like. He asks the doll for her name, and there's silence before Longlegs says, "Nice to meet you, Carrie Anne." He then says, "I know you're not afraid of a little darkness, because you are darkness," and covers her in a black blanket. Now, all of this was just a vision of Lee's, and she snaps out of it as the doctor explains that he heard it saying his ex-wife's name over and over again. Okay, sure, just go get her back already. So anyways, they ask if they can open the silver orb, but he says there's no point, there's nothing in there. They decide to just go visit Carrie Anne at the hospital. And Lee just says nothing about this vision she just saw, but whatever. Now we're seeing Longlegs in his car, going somewhere, and we're seeing more of his face, but there's a shadow over the top half of it. He gets to this hardware shop and walks over to grab a few things. And we see that a young girl's working the counter. He walks over to the register to buy his things, and she asks if she can help with anything else. So he decides he's gonna do this funky little performance with his hands and repeat, "Cuckoo, cuckoo," like a cuckoo clock. And Miss Girl is so unfazed by this, when I would literally pee myself if this man was doing all this at my place of work. But anyways, he goes on to ask her what day her birthday is, and she decides that's enough and calls out to her dad, saying, "Daddy, that gross man is back again." But she's still pretty unfazed. We now see Longlegs back in his car, driving, and all of a sudden he just bursts out, "Daddy, Mummy, unmake me, and save me from the hell of living." He said it a lot weirder than that, but I'm not going to do all that.
me! Save me from the hell of
He's not taking her reaction well, and well, he's basically mimicking the girl in the store. This could be out of frustration because he wasn't able to communicate with her and find out if he could target her. Or it could be another reason that we'll get into later. But overall, this is a very Nicolas Cage scream and overreaction. It's great. So now Agent Harker and Agent Carter are at the hospital to visit Carrie Anne. They talk to the admitting nurse who tells them that Carrie Anne has been in a catatonic state and sitting in a chair for as long as he's been there, until yesterday when she had her first visitor that basically snapped her out of this state. And now she's back to normal, eyes open and everything. They ask to see the sign-in for visitors, and the name written down is Lee Harker. And Lee hasn't been there yet. So she asks if they check IDs, to which the nurse responds, "No, but that sounds like a good idea." It's a comedic line, but wow, 90s healthcare laws are just crazy. Lee goes in to talk to Carrie Anne. The first thing Carrie Anne says is, "I've seen you before. You've been at my house, or someone who looks like you." Lee ignores this and asks her how she's been feeling. Carrie Anne explains that it feels like she's been in a long dream of darkness. We then get a recount of when her family was murdered. But this is interesting because wasn't she at school? How does she know how her family was killed? But she explains that her mom never liked her because she came out wrong. And we get this scene with her mom in her underwear running a knife up her stomach, which could mean that she doesn't like Carrie Anne because she was a C-section and gave her a scar there. We then see her mom with the doll that looks like Carrie Anne, and she begins stabbing it with a knife, which is pretty messed up if it looks just like her daughter. Carrie Anne goes on to explain that the only positive memory she has was that her dad was a good man, and we see her dad on the couch with the doll on his lap. We then see him cutting off a cow's head with a chainsaw, and then Carrie Anne says, that's why he'd done it. And we get a scene of the doll sitting in one room, watching the dad open the door for the priest. The priest walks in and goes over to greet the doll, but he gets a confused look and walks away. As he turns around, the dad is running at him with an axe and kills him. Her mom then comes up to the doll and is staring at it not long before her dad comes up behind her with an axe and also kills her. Carrie Anne just explains all this like it's nothing, and Lee is totally disturbed, but goes on to ask her about the visitor that came to her yesterday. Carrie Anne begins to say how she never wants to forget him and will do anything for him, or better, do anything for the man down the stairs. What? And she says she would jump out a window for him, or kill Lee if he asked her to. Okay, it's time to wrap it up here. But Lee asks her final question. Do you remember having a doll that looked just like you? Carrie Anne responds, nope. And you don't remember it either, you dirtsy, flirtsy old angel bleep. And no, she doesn't say bleep, y'all. So Lee is freaked out and is hyperventilating in the bathroom. She looks in the mirror and we now see Longlegs sitting in his room with a book. And he has posters of rock bands, and we even see the same area where he was talking to Carrie Anne's doll. Lee knows she's getting closer to Longlegs. Now, Agent Carter and Agent Harker are recapping their visit with Carrie Anne. Carter doesn't understand why she feels better after Longlegs visited her, and why Longlegs didn't kill her if she was his only surviving victim. Harker points out that she came out of her catatonic state when they found the doll, but Carter shakes it off as a coincidence. He even says that they opened the ball in the doll's head, but nothing was inside. Lee suggests that in some cultures, dolls are used to control people, but Carter says that Longlegs is just a man. He's not a witch doctor. Carter asks how Longlegs even knows that her name is Lee Harker, And why is the case moving so fast after all this time when she starts working on it? Lee says she doesn't know, and Carter begins to explain that he looked at her file again and saw that her mom called in a police report on January 13th, 1974, a day before her 9th birthday. The 14th. She was reporting a trespasser that was tall and pale. Lee didn't know her mom made this report and doesn't remember anyone that looked that way. Agent Carter tells her to go see her mom and ask about the incident. Lee drives up to the same White House we saw at the beginning of the movie and walks in to find Ruth. She casually walks into the room where Ruth is, and she isn't startled by this at all. Like, that could have been anyone walking into your house. But they hug, and we see that Ruth's house is pretty messy compared to Lee's cabin. The first thing her mom asks is, "Do you still say your prayers?" Lee responds this time by saying she's never said them because they scare her. Ruth then laughs, and Lee joins in with a chuckle, asking what's so funny. Her mom then says that she's right. Our prayers don't help us. Lee offers to make tea for her troubled mother, and we now see her in the kitchen, which is also super messy. Lee picks up a bag of pills from a box with a bunch of other medication and needles, and the bag has Lee's name on it, so maybe it's from when she was younger and she held on to it. Lee then turns to a closed door that's near the kitchen. She sees a spider crawling out of it and begins to get another vision. She once again sees red snakes, and now it's her and her mom, but when she was a child. Ruth tells her, "It's somebody's birthday soon." And we now see her mom washing what looks like her scrubs, since they have blood on them. And we know she used to be a nurse. She sees a car pulling up to their house, and it's already late at night. She tries calling the police, but the phone isn't working. So my girl goes and grabs a shotgun. And that's the end of Lee's vision. At this point, Lee is trying to open the door, but it's locked. And before she can grab a key to open it, Ruth calls her. Lee is now back in the room with her, and she says again she can't believe it's going to be Lee's birthday. She continues by describing when she gave birth. She says, "I bled, 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 bled." Lee cuts her off and asks if she remembers her 9th birthday. Her mom gets a look of distress and just says, "No, I don't think so. I don't remember anything, do you?" Yeah, she's totally selling it. But Lee continues to ask what happened and if anyone came to visit that day. And her mom is very reluctant and strange. She says no one ever visited. Not any family, no strangers, no big bad wolves, no anybody. And she says that little girls shouldn't know these things. Lee says that she's not a little girl anymore, and this triggers something within her mom. She says, "You're not a child anymore because you were allowed to grow up." Lee is confused by this, but her mom continues by saying it's a cruel world for the little things, and not all of them are allowed to live. She forgot everything about that night, but kept everything from her childhood. She suggests that she go look in her room if she wants answers. So Lee goes up to her room. And yeah, this lady really did keep everything because the house is cluttered everywhere. Anyways, Lee sits in her childhood room and then looks over at the tiny piano and a chest in the corner. She then remembers how she kept things in there and decides to bring it back to her cabin. As Lee is going through her childhood things, she comes across a box with Polaroids in it. She flips the pictures and stops at one. And then we get a scary first scene of Longlegs bending down to show his face, along with other images of a bloody nun. So Lee actually captured a photo of Longlegs that first time he visited her in the snow. And she's remembering the entire encounter with his face and her mom walking out to question who this random man is and why he's talking to her daughter. And we get this iconic scene. So he's doing this weird song and dance. He sings, "Let me in now, and it can be nice. Make me go, and I'll have to come back, not once, not twice, but as many times as I like."
And now, and it can be
Harker rushes over to Agent Carter's house and shows him the Polaroid of Longlegs. "It's him," she says. They decide to begin their manhunt for Longlegs, and we get this view of his workplace, or his lair, I guess, and we see all his posters. And this time, we even see that he has the same silver orb resting in the palm of a doll's hand. It then pans to a doll's head that hasn't been painted on or fixed up yet, and it fades into Longlegs' face. It's pretty spooky. We now see Longlegs standing at a bus stop with 2 bags of luggage. We hear police sirens approaching, and Longlegs just puts his luggage down and his hands in the air. The police arrest him and take him in for questioning. We see him through this videotape from his questioning. We discover that his real name is Dale Ferdinand Cobble. They ask how he knows Lee Harker, and he says he's a friend of a friend of a friend, and this friend wants me to stay. Then he shouts her out and wishes her a happy birthday. Not the greatest birthday wish, but we're here. He even looks at the people through the screen and says, "You'll be there, and you'll be there, and you'll be there," looking at Agent Browning, then Agent Carter, and then Agent Harker. He then starts singing happy birthday to Lee. Agent Browning then stops the video before the song finishes and says that the recording goes on for another 20 minutes, which I believe Nick Cage actually performed this, so that footage is around somewhere. Browning goes on to explain they found letters with his handwriting in his luggage, and the handwriting matches the letters from Longlegs. She says that the writings appear to be heavily satanic. There's no evidence of him killing anyone, but he worships the devil. However, in the United States, he's allowed to do so. She's more worried about how he knows Agent Harker, but since they have him now, she should be safe. Agent Harker is silent before she recites, "And I saw a beast rise out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his head the name of blasphemy." Agent Browning recognizes it as the Book of Revelations, and Agent Harker corrects her by saying it's just Revelation, no S. But she goes on to once again say that Longlegs has to have someone working with him. He's not alone. She knows it's not over and suggests that his accomplice, or accomplices, must have someone the family could trust. She brings up the missing 13th date in the algorithm, and they push it aside since today is the 13th and nothing has happened. Lee asks where Cobble is now. Agent Browning says he's downstairs, right under your feet. So Agent Harker goes downstairs to question him. Before she goes in, she gets a flashback to her first visit with Longlegs. Longlegs says his friend lives downstairs and that he's everywhere. You can even call him Mr. Downstairs. So Lee goes in, and Longlegs immediately greets her with, "There's the almost birthday girl." He begins talking about the day she went into law enforcement and how they'd laugh about it. And he goes on to say, "But it was only me who laughed, not she." So Lee asks who she is. And Longlegs says, the 7th sea to be given the same choice that they've all been given, crimson or clover. He explains that they can accept the gift and destroy it, and yourself and yourselves, or keep it and bow down and get down to the dirty work that gets dirtier as it cleans, like a mop. Lee budges in that she knows he doesn't work alone. He then proceeds to act out how the process goes with a family, and someone knocks at the door with a gift from the church. The man downstairs says the house is so white you can't miss it. Longlegs then says, "But Lee, your house was so white when I first came to visit." She snaps back by telling him his work is over and he'll be in prison for the rest of his life. Longlegs replies saying he'll be in here, but he'll also be a little bit of everywhere. Once again, Lee asks who he's been working with and who is the man downstairs. He then says, "Why don't you ask your mommy?" He then announces his commitment to Satan and starts brutally banging his head against the metal table, basically undoing that horrible nose job by knocking it clean off. So, Longlegs is now dead, and we're at the third part, those who celebrate their birthday. Agent Carter is now going off on Lee because Longlegs killed himself, and he's saying they now have no further information other than Carrie Anne jumping off the roof while she was talking to Longlegs, making it a death on the 13th. He says that she must have told her to do that when he went to go see her, just like he did with all the other families, and then yells, "with no accomplices." So he's pretty peeved. But dang, Miss Girl just went through it right now. Agent Browning and Agent Harker are now driving up to the mom's house to figure out what Longlegs meant. Agent Browning insisted on driving her because she figures she must be shaken up after what happened with Longlegs. So Lee says she's going to tell her mom they need her for questioning now, and Agent Browning decides to stay in the car. As she walks up to the house, we get that same heavy breathing from her. She then walks through the house looking for her mom, but she can't find her. We're back to Agent Browning in the car, and she notices that there's another car covered in the garage. Before she can make out what it is, Ruth walks up behind the car and shoots her in the head with a shotgun. Lee hears a gunshot just as she's about to go into the room that was previously locked. She rushes over to the window and sees her mom shooting Agent Browning once again. Dang, like I'm sure you got her the first time. Lee rushes outside the house looking for her mom with a gun in hand. She comes around the back and sees her mom now pointing the shotgun at a child that looks like her. Lee yells at her mom, and her mom sees her. When Lee gets closer, we now see it's a doll of Lee as a little girl. Lee doesn't recognize it. Ruth knows that they've caught Longlegs and whispers, "He's free." Lee reassures her, saying that Cobble is dead. Ruth then turns to the doll again and whispers, "And you're free too, baby girl." And she shoots the doll's head off. Black smoke comes out of Lee's head, and she passes out. Lee gets a flashback of her walking outside of her white house as a little girl again. She remembers her mom telling her no one ever came to visit them. No family, no big bad wolves, no anyone. She says that one day a man did come, a doll maker. He gifted her a doll that made her forget and told her where to look and what not to see. We see a scene of Lee as a little girl sitting on her bed with a shadowed figure with horns behind her. Her mom says that the devil wanted the little girl, but she couldn't let that happen. So she begged for Lee's life to be spared, and in exchange, she would help Longlegs with his plan. She used to work as a nurse, but now she had to kill families, and she begins to explain that she would knock at the door, tell them congratulations, they've won a gift from the church, and all she had to do was get the doll inside and watch to make sure everything followed as planned. And she ends it with, that was the deal she made. So, we basically get this big explanation as a flashback or a message from Ruth while she's unconscious. Lee then wakes up in a room, but not just any room, it's Longlegs' lair. Bum bum bum. And she hears her phone ringing, so she's scrambling to figure out where it's coming from. She walks up the stairs and walks out of the room that had once been locked in her mother's house. Longlegs' room had been under her the whole time. So, we'll get into this in a bit, but Lee goes on to answer the phone, and it's a distorted voice saying that she's late, and she promised she'd be at the birthday party. So Lee has to head to Agent Carter's house now. With her mom's car gone and Agent Browning shot dead in the car she came in, Lee has to uncover the car in the garage. Longlegs' car. She drives over there quickly and panicked, and she begins to let out a scream of pain and frustration. It's the first time we've seen her scream after trying to hold in her breath for so long. She gets to the house And sure enough, her mom's car is there, and she runs to the door with her gun in hand. But when Agent Carter answers the door, he's calm and smiling. Fana comes up behind him with a smile as well, and they insist she comes in and have a seat because Miss Ruby is just about to open presents. Lee walks into the living room, and there is a doll sitting next to Ruby, an exact copy of the little girl, and her mom is sitting across the living room on the couch, watching them. Lee urges Agent Carter that this isn't a lady from the church, it's her mom, and she's Cobble's accomplice. Agent Carter yells at her to sit down. Fana turns to Ruth and apologizes for not asking her name. Ruth says she's just a friend of a friend. Once again, Lee urges Carter, but he's so transfixed on the doll. Fana interrupts him and asks if he'd like to cut up the cake. He responds by saying he'll find something to cut up the cake with. She then gasps and clutches her throat like she's choking, but then goes back to smiling. Her and Carter then have a little argument about cutting the cake, and he calls her idea dumb, which we know is just uncharacteristic, and they then go into the kitchen to cut the cake. Her mom begins telling Lee how the whole family needs to die, or else they will burn and twist in hell forever and ever. I'm doing this for you. We see previous scenes of her mom dressed as the nun, going to each of the family's houses. She said she did it all so that the little girl Lee could grow up, so it was okay. And she begins quoting Revelation 13:1 again. And I'll do it forever as long as I stand on the sand of the sea and see a beast rising up out of the sea. And as she's saying all this, Fana is getting stabbed in the kitchen by Carter. Lee's mom then ends by praising Satan, and Carter is now charging at Lee with a knife. So she shoots him twice, and then she tries to move Ruby away from the doll. Her mom pulls a knife out of her bag and attempts to stop her, but Lee shoots her in the head. Lee grabs Ruby and tries shooting the doll, but for whatever reason, she can't. And we see flashbacks to Longlegs laughing, and we hear him singing Happy Birthday as Lee is transfixed on the doll, trying to shoot it. We then see Longlegs laughing in his chair again. He then praises Satan and gives us a kiss, and the movie ends. Alright, let's dive in deeper. So, the explanation for everything was satanic. People are disappointed by this, and I have to say, I am too. But that doesn't mean it's not a good and engaging film. I was just hoping for something more mastermind. And it's not that I don't find spiritual things scary. I do. And that's the problem because I'm already scared of these things. I believe they're real. So it doesn't take much to spook me with this stuff. And I'm sure that goes for a lot of people. But the plot is still interesting, and the film is shot amazingly. It has good acting, and Maika kills it. Even Nicolas Cage is unnerving in this. I had just watched It Could Happen to You, so this was a big jump in character for me to see. But anyways, like I mentioned before, Perkins basically let the story write itself. It's a cool concept having this doll maker possess families with silver orbs. It sounds really interesting. The coded letters are similar to those of the Zodiac Killer, with its strange symbols and difficult to understand. I'm not going to decipher all of these letters because I do not want these bad vibes in my house, but many people have already translated the letters, and you can use Longlegs to figure it out, along with Vigeneer cipher. It's all very cool, and it was used to promote the movie in the trailers, but I sadly was not along for that train, so it's just not my forte. I will include this letter though. So why the 14th? Why these families? Why the dolls? Why Lee? Why Longlegs? Let's look at the beginning. Longlegs pulls up to Lee's white house, and Longlegs mentions how the house of these families are always white. White represents purity, and it can be connected to Christianity. So when Longlegs pulls up to Lee's house, not only is it white, it's snowing. Longlegs said himself, Yours was the widest one. So, when Longlegs gets there, Lee is looking around and hears his cuckoo. Why does he do this? Well, it could be that cuckoo birds are known for laying their own eggs in a nest of another bird's. So, the other bird will nurture and care for it without knowing, and when the cuckoo egg hatches, it eats the other baby birds, and this is how it survives. And this is what Longlegs does. He sends his dolls to the victim's house and it possesses them and they're killed. He even made his own nest in Lee's home. Pretty creepy. Okay, so why does he call himself Longlegs? Well, he says it in the beginning. I seem to have worn my long legs today. And this is a phrase adults tell children because they usually have to bend down to be eye to eye with them. So Perkins says the name doesn't have any significance. It just sounds good, which, okay, fair. But it could be a correlation to the killer Baal, who was one of the rulers of the 9 circles of hell. He was a demon that took different forms and would control people. He is known as a subject to Satan and basically works alongside him. So when Cobble has his long legs on, we can't detect him. Heck, he's even off screen. But when he bends down to come into frame, we get the scariest part of the movie, in my opinion, his true form. And once upon a time, Longlegs was probably normal, but converted to doing all of this and has been filled with hatred. That's why when he's screaming in the car, it could be the little part of him that's left crying for help. So Longlegs working for Satan explains his specific targets. He has a nice Christian family and makes the dad kill everyone. Father figures are important in Christianity as God is referred to as the Father. But here he is committing acts of evil, and the daughters are targeted because women, most importantly young girls, are considered very pure in Christianity. And having a doll that looks like the daughter possess the father to do these things is also very twisted. It's blasphemy. This is also information from that guidebook Lee was reading on the 9 circles of hell. So Longlegs also targeted daughters on their 9th birthday. Maybe the 9 circles of hell is a correlation for that as well. And why was it daughters who had a birthday on the 14th? Well, there's one quote that was consistently said throughout the movie. And I stand upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. Revelation 13:1. 13 plus 1, 14. Yeah. So, okay, maybe that's a stretch, but that's what I can make out of it. So, does Lee have all the answers right off the bat? She was able to point out the house at the beginning of the movie like it was instinct. Well, it starts off with her having her very own doll. Longlegs gifted her a doll and attempted to kill her and her mother, but because of her mother's deal, she was spared. However, the doll was never destroyed and it controlled her. She always had Longlegs guiding her, and he was living below her this whole time. So Longlegs was literally the man downstairs. And we get another parallel to this when they finally catch Cobble and Lee asks where he is. Agent Browning says he's right under you. Spooky. But this is interesting because Longlegs would target families that had a father. And as far as we know, Lee's father isn't in the picture. So when Ruth made that deal, Longlegs kind of became a father figure and controlled them, which could also be a connection to his name, Daddy Longlegs. And we wonder why Lee was spared. Well, Longlegs says they all had been given the same choice, crimson or clover. Ruth chose crimson. And we see this in the little piano she has. It's more of a crimson color. Crimson and Clover is also a song, which could explain why it's represented by the piano. Also, Lee having the whitest house could refer to it being the holiest. Her mom was also a nurse. She used to save lives and now she's taking them. It's really twisted. So Longlegs being in her life this whole time can explain her psychic abilities. So when she's given that first psychic test at the beginning of the film, these were her answers. Camera, table, lights, tiger, door, mother, father, piano, 33, 0. So what do Her answers mean camera. There was the camera family that Carrie Anne was a part of. Table and lights. Longlegs has his workbench where he makes the dolls. It has bright lights outlining the mirror. Tiger. This one might just be about a predator presence. Door. The door that was locked in Lee's childhood home where Longlegs lived. Mother and father. When she's shown an upside down triangle, she says father. And Longlegs was following an algorithm that represented that satanic image with the triangle. Piano. Lee had that little piano in her room. Her mom told her that she kept everything from her childhood, and this can even be a parallel to how Agent Carter had Ruby keep a few things in her room, even if she was getting too old for them. Her mom still viewed her as a child she had to protect. So speaking of which, Ruby. Miss Ruby. When Agent Carter introduces his family to Lee, he calls his daughter Miss Ruby. And this is usually a phrase used for endearment, but it kind of plays into the family dynamic that Longlegs tries to turn upside down. So when Lee meets Ruby, they're having a conversation in Ruby's room. Lee grabs a trophy with its head wiped off, and it can be foreshadowing to how Lee's doll had its head blown off. This is where we get a theory, because they're talking about this trophy's head getting lost, and Lee says that's her job. Not to blow off its head, but to find it. But what if her job was to blow its head off all along? It's speculated that Longlegs led Lee to join the FBI and work on this case. That it was his plan all along because, in a way, she carried out his plan. Why was he so easy to find when they discovered it was him? It was a part of his plan. She killed Agent Carter and even her own mother. Her mother was doing this work to keep her safe, and she kills her. Which, yeah, it's reasonable, but again, it's very twisted. And Lee is carrying out Longlegs' work in some capacity by killing everyone to save Ruby. So maybe the doll had some lasting effects because it was with her for so long. But maybe that's what Longlegs meant when he said he'd be a little bit of everywhere. Because he still has an impact on Lee even while he's dead. Why isn't she able to shoot the doll at the very end? There's still some power there. The dolls hold a lot of power, and this can also be seen with Carrie Anne. They found her doll locked up in a box below a floorboard. When they took it out, it was all disheveled and its eyes had finally opened. We see this with Carrie Anne. She was in a catatonic state this whole time, but all of a sudden, she's conscious. But she still is pretty disoriented when Lee talks to her. Longlegs still has control over her. And so the doll is supposed to be this evil spirit that takes over the family. You can actually see the devil following Lee throughout the film. When she's looking at evidence and it makes the image of an eye, they're using her. And you can also hear voices telling her things as well. So why would these voices lead Agent Harker right to Longlegs? So she could solve the case and put a stop to it? Nope. She's playing a big role in Longlegs' plan. Even when she's driving over to Agent Carter's house to save his family, she's driving Longlegs' car and screaming, just like he did in a previous scene. They're connected. Let's talk about fun quirks. When Lee is in Agent Carter's house for the first time, she's more uncomfortable than we usually see her. She senses a bad vibe there. When she goes home later that night, Longlegs followed her home. You can even see his headlights at Agent Carter's house when they first pull in. And when Lee gets home, she's opening the door and you can hear rock music in the distance coming from his car. There's also a theory that she actually lives very close to her mom, and that's how Longlegs got there so fast. And that makes her relationship with her mom even weirder, because if she lives so close, why does she hardly see her? But I don't know, I didn't really catch that while watching. But nevertheless, Lee is untrusting of her mom. We can tell by their phone calls that they're not really close, but that's what Ruth sacrificed in order to save Lee's life. When Lee goes to visit and question Carrie Anne says something about seeing Lee at her house before, and so she actually means Ruth. She saw her there the day of the murder. Carrie Anne recalling those horrible things about her mother could actually be Longlegs distorting her memory, which is why she listens to him. When Lee goes to visit her mom, we see that her house is really messy. I've seen things about her having 6 of everything in the house, but also it could be that she's trying to hide something. Also, her clock is always at 6 and it never changes. Spooky. When they capture Longlegs and they pause his recording, Agent Carter sits in front of the frame and Longlegs has a scary face hovering over him, which can be foreshadowing to later when Longlegs is able to successfully control Agent Carter. All the imagery of snakes refers to Satan and how he's usually seen representing a serpent. The redness of the film is meant to cause disturbance because of how bright it is. When Lee shoots Ruth in the head, the blood makes a cross on her forehead. Lee Harker. Kind of sounds like Hercules when we flip her name. And the story of Hercules involves a hydra, a serpent in Greek mythology, created to kill Hercules. And it was Hercules who was supposed to slay the hydra, but every time he cut off its head, another one grew back. The beast with 7 heads. I thought this was pretty cool. The credits at the end of the film roll the opposite way, downwards, towards the man downstairs. The use of dolls is also based on the real-life case of Joan Bennett Ramsey. She was murdered in front of a doll that was a life-size replica of her. The doll was a Christmas gift and was still in a box with a bow on it, and Perkins thought it was interesting how it represented a coffin. So, this movie is Silence of the Lambs, meets Coraline, meets Seven, meets Zodiac, meets Hereditary. It's very interesting. But again, I feel like it would have been more captivating if it stayed a murder mystery. That's just my personal opinion, of course. And they did kind of have to explain the whole devil thing to us towards the end with that flashback. So it's supposed to be a plot twist, I get that. But I would recommend it for a good summer horror feature. And we got to see it in an RPX theater, which was really cool and even more chilling. The acting is great, the music is awesome, and Nicolas Cage looks freaky. They did an amazing job capturing that suspense in the movie. I don't recommend watching this if spiritual stuff gets to you. I'm excited to be wrapping this up because I've been having weird dreams for a while. Anyways, please let me know if there's anything else to add. I wanted to stick to the movie itself rather than the whole background of Satan, so there's a lot more to say there. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.